One of the reasons that I like to show my technique is because often people, when they look at my books and look at the pictures and they try to figure out how I make my artwork, they guess that I do collage where you cut out paper and glue it down. Sometimes they think that I cut stencils and actually sponge paint because of the texture, or they think that I just use acrylic paints with a lot of texture. I don't use any of those things. What I use is cotton rag fiber, and the picture is the paper and the paper is the picture. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to demonstrate, and then you'll get an idea of how I make the pictures in all my books. So I'm going to move over to the other side of the studio. This is what I use to make my pictures. This is cotton rag fiber. Comes in big 5-gallon buckets. This is recycled from the garment industry. These are the clippings they have left over after they cut the fabric. It comes to me damp, just like this. It feels like a pile of cold, wet mashed potatoes. Then I add a lot of water to it so that it flows. And I have it here in the vat. Now, this is the material I use. Paper makers call this pulp. Any material you use to make paper is called pulp, no matter if it's cotton or from the banana plant or whatever. We call it all pulp. Now, I need something to make my paper on. And I have a wooden frame, and it has fiberglass window screen on the front. And paper makers call this the mold. Now, this goes on top. This is a wooden frame, and paper makers call this the decal. Now, there are two ways that you can make a base sheet of paper. You can either pull a sheet, which I'm going to do here, or you can pour a sheet. So I need to move the fiber around so that it's suspended in the water. And I just dip down in, come through, pull straight up, shake it off a little, take the excess off the mold, and I'm going to bring it over here to this little dish pan. Because obviously I need something for the water to drain down into. Now, if I wanted to make a sheet of nice white paper, I would just take the decal off, take this over, flip it over, press it, and dry it. And a lot of watercolorists or calligraphers make their own paper because that way they can control the surface. So I just want to get a little more of this cotton off here. And I need to wipe my hands off because I'm covered. Paper making is a little messy and a little damp. Usually when I'm working on a book, I have on rubber shoes because there's a lot of water on the floor. Now the fiber comes to me white like this, and then I pigment it. This is pigmented fiber. This is not paint. This is pigmented fiber. It's just like colored threads floating in water. Actually, it is colored thread floating in water. And this is the way I do my backgrounds. I just pour on the color fiber, and I can put one color on top of another because this is colored thread. It's not paint. If you listen real carefully, you can hear the water dripping. So when I'm working on a big piece, it pretty much sounds like a rainforest in here. Now I can mix colors if I want, and I won't mix this up a lot because I want a little bit of a yellow speckle. And that'll drain through. And you can manipulate it, you can pat it, move it around. So basically that's the way I get my backgrounds. And you can see you get a nice soft edge because as the water drains through, the fiber settles into place. To get a nice soft edge, like the grass in the background, I take and I put the pulp in squeeze bottles. Now this is not paint, this is fiber, just like I made the background color. And you would just squeeze this and squeeze out your design. Just like when you make a sandwich and use the mustard and ketchup in a squeeze bottle and you make a happy face or a heart or I love you on your burger, veggie burger, I'm a vegetarian. Or you can spoon it on, that gives you a nice soft edge. But if you want a hard edge, like the grass in the front or the child's face, then you cut stencils. And that's what I've done here. I've drawn the image that I wanted, grass, on this material. This is a recycled foam material, very similar to the meat trays at the market. And I put my stencil on the background, and I press it down firmly I don't want to press it down too hard, because if I press it down too hard, when I go to pull it up, it might pull up some of the background. So now I want to fill this in with another color. And I can either spoon that, recycled from the fast food, or I can squeeze bottle it. And I like to use the squeeze bottles because I have a little more control. And I put several colors of green because, of course, if you go outside and you look at the grass, it's not the same color of green everywhere. And again, I can put a dark color on top of a light color on top of a dark color, and they'll each keep their own color because it's fiber, it's not paint. Isn't this relaxing? You can hear the water dripping. Now, I want to take the stencil off. I use a craft knife to do this. You can just use a toothpick. What you want to do is you just want to catch the edge, and you jiggle it, and you check to make sure that your pulp or your fiber is sticking to the background, not to your stencil. And if it does stick to your stencil, you just push it back with your toothpick or craft knife. And you can manipulate. See, that pulled a little up there. And that's an important thing to remember. If you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can redo it. So you can see, if you look closely, you can see that there are actual layers there, that the grass is a layer on top of the background layer. Now, I'm going to pat this gently because I want to put another stencil on top of this, and I want to make sure that the next stencil doesn't pick up that layer. And so here I have my bunny. I drew my image on my stencil material, cut it out, and now I'm going to put it on the background, and again, you press it down firmly, not too hard, and then you just fill in your cutout area. And basically this is the way, and we're going to have a clog. There we go. So usually I just squirt out, like towards you. Let's see if this one's better. And like I said, you can spoon this in. I just like the squeeze bottles because I have a little more control. My squeeze bottles I get from all sorts of places. Honey comes in some, fabric paint in squeeze bottle. A good place to get squeeze bottles is from people who color their hair. But they're a little sensitive about this, I want to warn you, so ask for them very carefully. What you say is, if you know somebody who colors their hair, could they save the squeeze bottles for me? So now I want to give my rabbit an eye, and because this is pulp, it's not paint, I can take and manipulate it, roll it into a little ball. You could use a toothpick for this. Oops, got a little too much there. Put it in place where you want your eye. And then I'll put a little yellow in the center where the light. You can see I don't even have to be that tidy because the stencil blocks out the background, and that determines my shape. So now I'm going to fill in a little bit right here. A little more. Now I want to take my stencil off, and again I want to do that very carefully and slowly, jiggling it as I go, checking to make sure that the fiber is not sticking to the stencil, but it's sticking to the background. So press it down. And if it does pull up some areas, of course, just like I made the eye, you can add fiber. So there I have the rabbit. Now, I'm going to take the decal off. And you can see it's fairly thick. And this is very fragile at this point because it is like a pile of mashed potatoes. So I need to get this off my mold, and to do that I need something soft and absorbent. These are paper maker's felts. You can use blankets, old blankets, or a pile of newspapers. And then I need some cloths that are wet. And what I use is interfacing from the fabric store. And I'm just going to use half of this and double it over. You can use men's handkerchiefs or those handy wipes from the kitchen work great. You just want something thin that's nice and wet because the pulp wants to go where it's wettest. That's called couching. Rhymes with smooching, spelled like couching. Means to transfer from one surface to another. So now I'm going to put another damp cloth on top. And I want my sponge to be damp. I want my sponge to be damp. I don't want it to be wringing wet, just damp. And I take and I press down firmly. And I squeeze out the excess water. Now some of that water is going down below into my paper maker's felts, but a great deal of it's coming up into the sponge. Squeeze that out. The more water you get out and the more you compress your fibers together, the stronger your dry paper is going to be. Okay, let's see what we've flip this over. Peel back the fiber, the fabric I mean. And I have a sheet of wet paper. And you can see at this point it's pretty sturdy. Now I would take and put this in the vacuum table, which has a large vacuum pump, and it would suck out even more water. Then I would take and I would put this in the drying press, which is actually Homosoap board, which is made from recycled newspaper, and blotter paper, and that puts a downward pressure on it, and it pulls the moisture out of the paper and keeps it flat and smooth. So that's the way I make all the pictures in my books. Now this is a very small piece of paper. When I'm making pictures for a book, I have to use a screen that's the size I want the end picture to be. This is the size screen I usually use for a picture book. If I'm doing a poster, this is the size screen I would use. And when I'm doing a very large piece of art just to hang as an independent piece, not part of a book, this is the size screen I would use. This screen is so big that when it comes to the flipping over, the couching, I can't do it by myself. I have to have somebody help me because it's too heavy. And on this, I would pour. I wouldn't pull the first sheet, the base sheet like I showed you. So those are the screens. Now sometimes, like in this book, Barnyard Banter, I add things to the pulp. In other words, I don't use the straight pulp, just the color. I add all sorts of different materials. And you can add anything. And where once there was a wood, I used grasses, the grass seed. And if you look in the borders, you'll see this grass seed. You can use horsehair. This is from our horse's mane. You can add dried flowers. This is from heather. This gives a beautiful texture. And if you look at the picture in Barnyard Banter, let me find it, with the peacocks, I wanted something that looked like, right here, I wanted something that looked like wire fencing. And one of the drawbacks of pulp painting is the fact that I can't get really fine detail like that. So I was putting the groceries away one day when I came home from the market, and I was taking the potatoes out of this sack like this, and I thought, this looks just like wire fencing. So I soaked this material, the string sack, in wallpaper paste and then pressed it into the wet pulp. So sometimes you can apply other materials to the surface. And in Barnyard Banner I used a lot of straw. Actually you can use most anything. I used tea from tea bags. That's how I got the texture under the roosters. Coffee grounds I used on the pig page. Just save all your old coffee grounds. So you see there's a use for everything. You just have to figure out what it is. Now if you want to try making paper, there are lots of ways you can do it just using things around your house. For color, you can recycle construction paper or any of those colored flyers you get on your door. You just tear the paper into little pieces, about that big, and you press those torn pieces into a 1/3 cup, and you put that in a blender, and then you fill your blender about 2/3 or 3/4 full of water. Now remember to put your top on. That's real important because we've had a few occasions where people have forgotten that. And then you just blend it. Now this is going to be really loud. And you blend it for about 40 to 60 seconds. And, well, I'll just do it like this. And you have pulp. Now this is a coarser pulp. If you want a finer pulp, you just blend it longer. Now if you're using the squeeze bottles, you want a really fine pulp. Now, you noticed I put a small amount of paper and a large amount of water. You really can't have too much water, but you definitely cannot have enough water. And if you have too much paper and not enough water, what will happen is your blender will have to work too hard and it'll actually burn out. So make sure you put enough water in there. Now, you need something to make your paper on. As I showed you before, this is a wooden frame and it has fiberglass window screen on the top. You can actually use a storm window insert. Another easy way to make the mold and decal is to use embroidery hoops, and this is just fiberglass window screen. Put in the embroidery hoop. You would cut off this excess. If you wanted to make round paper, you would take another set of hoops and put those on top. They would serve as your decal, and that keeps the pulp or the fiber from going off the screen. And remember, I use cotton rag fiber. This is wood fiber, but all the material that you use to make paper you call pulp. Now, I like to make shaped paper, and cookie cutters work really well for that. You just put a cookie cutter on your screen, and you take and pour your fiber inside the cookie cutter. Now, because we want shaped paper and we want a nice clean edge, we want to press out the excess water while it's on the screen. If we take the cookie cutter off when there's too much water left mixed with your pulp or fiber, then your edges are just going to ooze on out. So you just press out the excess. One thing about paper making is that you can make your paper as thick or thin as you want. You could cut out a heart, of course, out of regular paper, but it would be much thinner than this. And you take off your cookie cutter, and you have heart-shaped paper, and you're going to cooch it. Remember, you're going to need something soft and absorbent and a wet cloth. And then you need another damp cloth on top, and then you need your sponge, and you want your sponge to be damp. You don't want it wringing wet, and you press down firmly. Now you can add all sorts of things to your paper. You could have added glitter to the red pulp you made and have a glittery red heart, and you have a sheet of heart-shaped paper. And there are lots of other things. You can put other images in here. You could have put a little heart cookie cutter inside and then poured around it and then poured the bigger one so you had a heart inside a heart. Now, an even easier way to make paper, if you don't have a blender, is you take a jar, and you need a top. You need a lid to your jar. And you put some water in your jar. Now notice that I have a little too much. I've just put a small amount of water in here. That's because I need this space to agitate, so you don't want to put too much water in your jar. Then you take some toilet paper, which I hope most of you have at home, and you just take that and you tear it up in little pieces and you put it in the water. You can do this with Kleenex too. Toilet paper and Kleenex work really well. Toilet paper in particular because it's a really soft, short fiber that's made to break down easily in the sewage systems. And you just become the human blender. You just shake it. And you don't have to shake very long. You can stop and see how the fiber is broken down. But see, the agitation makes the fiber break down until you have pulp. And of course, this is also wood fiber. Now, you can add things to the toilet paper. You can add herbs, potpourri, this is parsley. You can add little bits of colored paper. You can add little colored strings. You just add it, shake it up. And I'm going to make another piece of shaped paper. I just put my cookie cutter on the screen, pour the pulp inside, press the pulp to fit the form. A little more in this corner. You also can make your own glitter by taking the foil margarine wrappers or the foil that chewing gum is wrapped in, cutting it up, putting it in the blender with your pulp. You can make homemade glitter. It's just fun to experiment. There are so many things that you can add to the pulp to create different textures and surfaces. And the same thing, we'll just take our... And we have heart-shaped paper. You would flip that over, press it, and dry it. I'm going to show you a few things that we've made, my daughter and I, and my husband and I, using recycled paper. This is recycled computer paper, and these are little nature journals. This is the size of the original paper. The cover paper we made a little thicker. The inside paper we made a little thinner. We added pine needles and other things we found under the trees to the pulp. So this is recycled computer paper, and this is bound then with a stick and raffia. This is recycled grocery sack, the brown grocery sacks like you get at the market. And this is two-sided paper. This side is made from recycled newspaper. We tore it up and put it in the blender, just like we did the construction paper. And it comes out gray because of the black type on it. Then this is the grocery sack. Now the way it's two-sided is first you pour your newspaper layer, then you pour your grocery sack layer on top of it. Then you flip it over, press it, and dry it. And the grocery sack has those little brown dots in there. That's coffee grounds. And this sun image was made from pressing the pulp, just like this toilet paper pulp, into a cookie mold and letting it dry in the cookie mold. And here's some more herbed paper. There are just so many things. This is dill. Some of these papers keep their scents for up to about 6 months.